My cheating wife slept with a Twitch fan and plotted to frame me, so I used her trap to watch her fall. I don't hear the thunder when a storm comes, because it comes from inside the house. My name is Philip, I'm 30 years old, and I work in social media marketing. For the longest time, I thought I had everything figured out. I had what everyone would call the perfect marriage. My wife Katie was the kind of woman people envied me for. Intelligent, gentle, beautiful in that effortless way that made heads turn when we walked into a room together. She had this laugh that could light up an entire restaurant, and when she smiled at me, I felt like I was the luckiest man alive. We'd been married for 4 years when the pandemic hit. Like everyone else, we found ourselves trapped at home, trying to make the best of a situation nobody saw coming. I watched Katie struggle with the isolation, saw how the endless days blended into each other, and I wanted to do something special for her. Something that would bring joy back into her eyes. That's when I decided to surprise her with a gaming setup. Not just any setup, I'm talking about a beast of a machine. I spent weeks researching, reading reviews, comparing specs. I wanted it to be perfect. A custom-built PC with the latest graphics card, a curved monitor that took up half the desk, professional-grade streaming equipment, LED lighting that could change colors to match her mood. The whole thing cost me nearly $8,000, every penny of which I considered an investment in my wife's happiness. The day I revealed it to her, setting it up in what used to be our spare bedroom, her reaction was everything I'd hoped for. She threw her arms around me, tears in her eyes, telling me I was the most thoughtful husband in the world. She kissed me like she hadn't in months, and for a moment, everything felt right again. At first, it was exactly what I'd imagined. Katie would spend hours playing games, exploring virtual worlds, her laughter echoing through the house. She seemed genuinely happy for the first time since the lockdowns began. She started with single-player games, story-driven adventures that she'd tell me about over dinner, her eyes lighting up as she described the characters and plot twists. Then she discovered Twitch. It started innocently enough. She'd always been naturally charismatic, and the idea of streaming her gameplay seemed like a natural extension of her personality. She was nervous at first, asking me to help her set up the streaming software, to check her audio levels, to make sure the lighting was flattering. I was supportive, encouraging even. I thought it was wonderful that she was finding a creative outlet, maybe even a way to earn some extra income doing something she enjoyed. Her first few streams were small affairs, maybe 5 or 10 viewers, mostly other gamers who stumbled across her channel. But Katie had something special. She was genuinely entertaining, quick with jokes, great at engaging with chat. Her viewer count started growing steadily. 10 became 20, 20 became 50. Within a few months, she had a regular audience of several hundred people who tuned in to watch her play. I was proud of her. I'd brag to my friends about my wife the streamer, show them clips of her best moments, talk about how she was building something from nothing. When she started making decent money from donations and subscriptions, I felt vindicated in my decision to buy her the setup. It had been worth every penny. But somewhere along the way, something changed. It started with small things that I dismissed at first. Katie began spending more time in her streaming room, even when she wasn't streaming. She'd go in there right after dinner and not come out until I was already in bed. When I'd knock on the door to say goodnight, she'd call out that she was just finishing up. But I could hear her talking to someone in a voice that was somehow different from her streaming voice, softer, more intimate. She started asking for privacy during her streams. She'd installed a lock on the door, explaining that she needed to focus and that my walking by was distracting to her viewers. It made sense, I supposed. Professional streamers needed professional boundaries. But it felt strange, being locked out of a room in my own house. The physical distance started bleeding into our relationship. Katie would go to bed later and later, claiming she needed to unwind after streaming. When I'd try to cuddle with her, she'd stiffen slightly, mumbling something about being tired or stressed. Our conversations became shorter, more functional. Instead of sharing her day with me, she'd give me brief updates. Stream went well. Chat was toxic today. Need to order new equipment. I told myself it was the stress of building a streaming career. Content creation was demanding. I knew that from my own work. She was probably just overwhelmed, trying to balance her new passion with our relationship. I needed to be patient, understanding, supportive. But the doubt started creeping in when I noticed her behavior outside of streaming hours. She'd be on her phone constantly, texting someone, always tilting the screen away when I came near. When I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd give vague answers, just someone from chat, a viewer asking about my setup, other streamers sharing tips. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late October. I was working late in the living room when I realized I needed to grab my phone charger from the bedroom. As I walked past Katie's streaming room, I heard her laughing, not her public streaming laugh, but the private laugh she used to reserve for me. The one that was genuine and unguarded and intimate. I paused outside the door, not meaning to eavesdrop, but unable to keep walking. Through the thin walls I could hear her voice, muffled but clear enough to make out words. "You're so bad. No, don't say that. I wish you were here too." My heart started pounding. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, straining to hear more, hoping I was misunderstanding. But when I heard her say, "I can't wait to finally meet you, Jay," in a tone I hadn't heard her use with me in months, I knew. I knew, but I wasn't ready to accept it. The next few weeks were torture. I became a detective in my own home, watching my wife for signs, looking for evidence of what I was increasingly certain was happening. I noticed she'd changed her computer password, something she'd never done before. She'd started taking her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. She'd mention names in passing, Jay mostly, but others too. And when I'd ask follow-up questions, she'd quickly change the subject. The worst part was how she started treating me. The warmth that had defined our relationship began to evaporate. She'd snap at me for minor things, leaving a dish in the sink, watching TV too loudly, asking about her day. She'd pick fights over nothing, then use those fights as justification for needing space. She started sleeping in the guest room, claiming I snored too much, though I'd never snored before. I tried talking to her about it. I sat her down one evening and told her I felt like we were drifting apart, that I missed the connection we used to have. She looked at me with what I can only describe as pity and said, "Philip, you're being clingy. I need room to grow as a person. This streaming thing is important to me, and I need you to support me, not smother me." Clingy. The word hit me like a physical blow. I'd never been called clingy in my life. I was the guy who gave his partners space, who respected boundaries, who prided himself on not being possessive or jealous. But here was my wife, the person who knew me better than anyone, telling me I was suffocating her by wanting to spend time together. I started questioning everything. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe my expectations were outdated. Maybe this was what modern relationships looked like, and I needed to adapt. I tried giving her more space, backing off, focusing on my own work and hobbies. But the distance only seemed to grow. That's when I decided I needed to know for sure. I'm not proud of what I did next, but desperation makes you do things you never thought you were capable of. One evening while Katie was in the shower, I tried to access her computer. The password had been changed, as I'd suspected, but I'd watched her type it enough times to have an idea. It took me 3 tries, but I got in. What I found broke something inside me that I don't think will ever fully heal. Her Discord was still open, and the messages were right there. Months of them. Hundreds of conversations with Jay, starting innocent enough. Discussions about games, streaming tips, casual banter. But they'd evolved into something else entirely. By the most recent messages, they were exchanging photos I'd never seen, making plans to meet in person, talking about their future together. But it wasn't just the emotional affair that devastated me. As I scrolled through their conversations, I began to see a pattern that made my blood run cold. Sarah wasn't just cheating on me. She was systematically destroying our marriage as part of a calculated plan. In her messages to Jay, she talked about me like I was an obstacle to be removed. She complained about having to deal with me, described me as pathetic and desperate. She outlined a strategy. She would gradually make me miserable, push me to the breaking point, make me look like the bad guy in our relationship. She'd document my emotional instability, my controlling behavior, my inability to support her dreams. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. She would drive me to increasingly desperate attempts to save our marriage, which she would then frame as harassment or abuse. She'd build a case that I was preventing her from pursuing her career, that I was financially controlling, that I was emotionally manipulative. When the time was right, she'd file for divorce, take half of everything and walk away looking like the victim. But the most chilling part was what she was doing with our finances. I discovered that she'd been slowly moving money from our joint accounts into personal accounts I didn't know existed. She'd opened credit cards in my name, run up debt, then transferred the money to herself. She was planning to leave me not just broken-hearted but financially ruined. Reading those messages felt like watching security footage of someone methodically dismantling my life. Every fight we'd had, every moment of coldness, every time she'd made me feel like I was losing my mind, it had all been orchestrated. She hadn't fallen out of love with me. She'd made a deliberate choice to destroy me. I sat in that chair, staring at the screen, feeling like the world had shifted beneath my feet. The woman I'd loved for years, the woman I'd trusted with everything, had been playing a long game designed to ruin me, and I'd been so desperate to save our marriage that I'd been helping her do it. But as the initial shock wore off, something else began to take its place. Not anger, not rage, but something colder and more calculating. If Sarah wanted to play games, I could play games too. But I wouldn't play by her rules. I took screenshots of everything, every message, every financial transaction, every piece of evidence that showed what she'd been planning. I copied files, backed up data, documented everything I could find. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed, lying next to my wife as if nothing had happened. The next morning, Sarah was her usual distant self, barely acknowledging me as she got ready for another day of streaming. I made coffee, said good morning, asked about her plans. She gave me short answers, the same responses she'd been giving me for months. But now I understood exactly what I was dealing with. I didn't confront her. I didn't have an emotional breakdown or demand explanations. Instead, I did something Sarah clearly hadn't expected. I started playing the long game too. I began by protecting myself financially. Quietly, carefully, I started moving money from our joint accounts into accounts she didn't know about. I contacted a lawyer, one who specialized in complex divorce cases involving financial fraud. I began documenting everything, her behavior, our conversations, the state of our relationship. I gathered evidence of her affair, her financial manipulations, her systematic campaign to destroy our marriage. But most importantly, I stopped trying to save a relationship that was already dead. For weeks, I maintained the facade. I continued being the clingy husband she was portraying me as, but now it was performance art. Every desperate attempt to connect with her, every plea for us to work on our marriage, every moment of apparent emotional instability was carefully calculated. I was giving her exactly what she wanted, evidence of my problematic behavior, while simultaneously building my own case. Katie seemed pleased with my apparent deterioration. She'd screenshot our text exchanges where I begged her to spend time with me, save my voicemails, where I asked her to talk to me about what was wrong. She thought she was collecting ammunition for her eventual divorce filing. She had no idea I was doing the same thing. The turning point came in January, almost 3 months after I'd discovered her plan. Katie had been pushing for us to go to couples therapy, ostensibly to work on our issues, but I knew from her messages to Jay that she saw it as another opportunity to build her case against me. She wanted a professional third party to witness my controlling behavior and her reasonable responses. I agreed to the therapy, but I also made a decision. I was done playing defense. It was time to end this. I didn't make a grand dramatic gesture. I didn't confront her with printouts of her messages or have a screaming match about her betrayal. Instead, I did something much more effective. I disappeared. On a Thursday morning in late January, while Katie was sleeping in after a late night streaming, I packed a bag and left. I'd already rented a small apartment across town, already transferred my essential belongings. I left her a simple note. I need some space to think about our relationship. I'll contact you soon. Then I turned off my phone and vanished from her life. I can only imagine her panic when she woke up to find me gone. She'd been so focused on controlling the narrative, on managing my responses, on keeping me dancing to her tune, that she'd never considered I might simply remove myself from the equation. For the first time in months, Katie couldn't predict what I was going to do next. She called, texted, sent emails. She showed up at my office, my friends' houses, anywhere she thought I might be. She even called my family, telling them she was worried about my mental health, that I'd been acting strangely, that she feared I might hurt myself. It was exactly the kind of manipulation I'd expected from her, but it didn't work because I'd already spoken to everyone who mattered, already explained the situation, already shown them the evidence of what she'd been doing. For 2 weeks, I was a ghost. I went to work, I went to therapy, I focused on rebuilding my mental health and preparing for what came next. I didn't respond to Sarah's increasingly frantic attempts to reach me. I let her stew in the uncertainty, let her wonder if her plan was falling apart. When I finally made contact, it was through my lawyer. The divorce papers were comprehensive, devastating, and irrefutable. Every financial transaction Katie had hidden, every conversation with Jay, every aspect of her systematic plan to destroy me was laid out in clinical detail. But more than that, the filing included something she'd never seen coming, a counter-narrative. Instead of the story she'd been crafting, of a controlling husband who couldn't handle his wife's success, the papers told a different story entirely. They showed a calculated campaign of emotional abuse, financial fraud, and systematic manipulation. They painted a picture of a woman who had exploited her husband's love and trust to facilitate an affair while simultaneously destroying his mental health and financial security. I didn't ask for half of everything. I asked for everything I was legally entitled to, plus damages for the emotional and financial harm she'd caused. I asked for restitution for the money she'd stolen, compensation for the therapy I'd need to recover from her abuse, and a restraining order to prevent her from continuing to harass me. The papers were served to her at home, while she was preparing for another evening of streaming. I can picture her reading through them, the color draining from her face as she realized how completely her plan had backfired. Her first response was predictable, denial, and counterattack. She tried to claim that I'd stolen her private messages, that I was the one who was emotionally abusive, that I was trying to ruin her streaming career out of jealousy. She painted herself as the victim of a vindictive ex-husband who couldn't handle her independence. But the evidence was overwhelming, and her story had too many holes. The financial records showed clearly who had been stealing from whom. The messages with Jay revealed her true motivations and her systematic plan to destroy our marriage. Most damaging of all, I had recordings of conversations where she'd admitted to her manipulation, thinking she was talking to a broken man who would never use her words against her. The legal proceedings were swift and decisive. Katie's lawyer tried to negotiate, but there wasn't much to negotiate about. The evidence was clear, the law was on my side, and I wasn't interested in making deals with someone who had spent months plotting my destruction. In the end, I got the house, the majority of our assets, and restitution for the money she'd stolen. Katie was left with her gaming setup and whatever she could carry. The restraining order meant she couldn't contact me directly, couldn't show up at my work, couldn't use our mutual friends to get messages to me. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was watching her realize that actions have consequences. Jay, it turned out, wasn't quite as invested in their relationship when it moved from fantasy to reality. When Katie reached out to him after I'd left, expecting him to be her knight in shining armor, she discovered that he was married too, and had no intention of leaving his wife for someone he'd never actually met. Their love affair dissolved the moment it stopped being a secret game and became a real-life complication. Katie's streaming career, which she'd claimed was so important to her, crumbled without the financial stability I'd been providing. The expensive equipment, the high-speed internet, the comfortable streaming setup, all of it had been subsidized by my income. When that support disappeared, she couldn't maintain the lifestyle that had made her streams successful. Her audience, which had grown accustomed to high-quality content and consistent schedules, began to drift away as her production values declined and her streaming became erratic. The donations and subscriptions that she'd seen as evidence of her independence turned out to be surprisingly dependent on the professional setup I'd provided. Within 6 months, Katie had to move back in with her parents. The woman who had called me pathetic and desperate was now dependent on family support, working part-time jobs to make ends meet. Her dreams of streaming fame reduced to occasional broadcasts from her childhood bedroom. I don't take pleasure in her downfall, but I won't pretend I don't see the justice in it. She'd made deliberate choices to betray and destroy someone who had loved her unconditionally. She'd traded a stable, loving relationship for the thrill of an online affair and the fantasy of financial independence. The consequences of those choices were entirely her own. As for me, I spent the months after the divorce in therapy, working through the trauma of discovering that the person I'd trusted most had been systematically plotting against me. It took time to rebuild my sense of reality, to learn to trust my own perceptions again, to understand that I hadn't been crazy or paranoid. I'd been responding normally to abnormal circumstances. The healing process was slow and sometimes painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wasn't constantly questioning my own behavior, wasn't trying to solve problems that had been manufactured by someone else. I was free to be myself again. I've started dating again, cautiously but with hope. I've learned to recognize red flags I missed before, to trust my instincts when something doesn't feel right, to understand that real love doesn't involve manipulation or games. I've found someone who appreciates transparency, who values honesty, who would never dream of systematically destroying someone else's life for personal gain. The gaming setup I bought for Katie is long gone, sold to help pay for the legal fees. But sometimes I think about that purchase and what it represented. My desire to make the person I loved happy, to support their interests, to be a good partner. Those impulses weren't wrong, even if they were exploited by someone who didn't deserve them. I've learned that you can't control whether someone will betray you, but you can control how you respond to that betrayal. You can choose to be a victim, or you can choose to be a survivor. You can let someone else's darkness consume you, or you can use it as motivation to build something better. I chose to build something better. The house is quieter now, but it's peaceful in a way it never was during those final months of my marriage. There's no tension, no manipulation, no carefully orchestrated drama. Just the calm that comes from knowing that the person sharing your space genuinely wants to be there, genuinely cares about your well-being, genuinely sees you as a partner rather than an obstacle. I've kept some of the legal documents from the divorce, not out of spite, but as a reminder. They're proof that I didn't imagine what happened to me, that I wasn't crazy or paranoid or controlling. They're evidence that sometimes the quiet, calculating response is more effective than the loud, emotional one. When people ask me about my divorce, I don't go into details. I simply say that my ex-wife and I had different values, different ideas about what marriage should be, different definitions of loyalty and honesty. It's true, even if it's not the whole truth. But late at night, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd never bought that gaming setup. Would Sarah have found another way to meet Jay? Would she have developed the same systematic plan to destroy our marriage? Or was I simply the victim of circumstance, of technology, of the way modern life creates opportunities for betrayal that previous generations never had to navigate? I've concluded that it doesn't matter. Sarah's choices were Sarah's choices. The gaming setup was just a tool. The real problem was the person using it. If it hadn't been Twitch and Discord, it would have been something else. People who are capable of systematic betrayal will always find a way to betray. What matters is that I survived it. I learned from it. I became stronger because of it. I'm not the same person I was when I surprised my wife with that expensive gaming setup, full of hope and love and trust. I'm more cautious now, more aware of red flags, more protective of my own well-being. Some might say I'm more cynical, but I prefer to think I'm more realistic. I've learned that love without respect is worthless, that trust without transparency is dangerous, that kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own destruction. Most importantly, I've learned that I don't need someone else's validation to know my own worth. I don't need to be chosen by someone who treats me as disposable. I don't need to fight for a relationship with someone who sees me as an enemy. The storm that came from inside my house nearly destroyed me, but I weathered it, and when it passed, I was still standing, damaged perhaps, but not broken. Wiser, certainly, and more careful about who I let into my life. I don't lose sleep over what happened anymore. I sleep soundly, peacefully, in a home that's truly mine, next to someone who chose me not as a convenience or an obstacle, but as a partner. The thunder has passed, and what remains is the quiet strength that comes from knowing you can survive anything. The gaming setup is gone, but what I learned from buying it, about love, about trust, about the importance of paying attention to actions rather than words, that knowledge is mine to keep. And unlike the marriage it helped destroy, that's something no one can take away from me. Some storms destroy everything in their path, others just clear away the debris so you can build something better. I'm grateful in the end for the storm that showed me who I really was, and who my wife really was, before it was too late to save myself. The person I am now wouldn't have bought that gaming setup for someone who hadn't earned it. But the person I am now also wouldn't have needed to, because I've learned to choose partners who would never use my generosity as a weapon against me. That's the real victory. Not just surviving the betrayal, but becoming someone who's too wise to be betrayed in the same way again.